This week's Parshat Shemot. Shemot is the first word in the book of Exodus. So the whole book is called Shemot, means names. These are the names of the children of Israel who came into Egypt. And it is the name of this Parsha. And as Ira pointed out here, at Hebrew and Brews, this is a very well-written tale. In a literary sense, it's a very well-told tale and has a lot going on. Pharaoh is determined to suppress the numerical growth of the Hebrews, which he sees as a threat. And he orders the midwives to kill all newborn Hebrew baby boys and throw them into the river, the Nile. And the midwives quietly refuse. Even when summoned by Pharaoh to explain, they lie to his face. And then when Moses is born, we see a larger conspiracy, an even larger conspiracy of women that saves him. A conspiracy of women. His mother hides him for 3 months. Then she puts him in a basket to flow down the river and has his sister, Miriam, watch after him. And then Bat Paro, Pharaoh's daughter, and her maidens find him. And she knows exactly that this is a Hebrew child. She even says so in the text. Suddenly Miriam approaches and says, I know of a suitable nursemaid who could take care of him. And Pharaoh's daughter instructs her to take the child to that nursemaid. I'll even pay the wages and have him returned when he is weaned. So Miriam takes the baby and brings him back to his mother to continue nursing and raising him. And then she brings him back later to the daughter of Pharaoh, and Moses is raised inside the house of Pharaoh, directly under his nose, at the behest of a conspiracy of women. Conspiracy, really, of an underclass. The women are probably an underclass. The men aren't taking them seriously enough to pay much attention. Still, it takes great courage, wits, and wisdom. When the midwives are summoned to Pharaoh to explain why they have been letting the Hebrew boys live, they explain, Ki lo chanashim hamitzriot ha'ibriot, ki chayot heina, v'terem tavo elehen hamyoledet v'yoldu. For the Hebrews are not like the Egyptian women, but they are chayot. That is a double meaning. They are chayot. Before the midwives can get to them, they give birth. Okay, they are chayot, and if you read the translations, you'll say it says they are lively, they are vigorous. The Hebrew women, lively, vigorous. Before the midwives can get to them, they give birth. And perhaps that's exactly what the midwives meant. But perhaps also the midwives knew that's not what the Egyptians could hear. To say they're chayot also means they're animals, they're beasts. It's a way of delegitimizing, demonizing, dehumanizing. That's what the Egyptians might have been willing to hear. So might the midwives have been able to say and truly mean what they were saying without lying and compromising their integrity, but allowing the Egyptians to draw their own conclusions. These themes of resistance and resilience, that's what goes through my head as we read this. And this story, of course, this leads into the Passover story. We'll be reading this for weeks. But these stories of resilience and resistance have resonance for today as we approach Martin Luther King Day and as we read today's news in America. This week we see that the death toll at the hands of our American government, inflicted by the American government, inflicted by agents upon people in America, is rising. 3 people were shot by our government this week. We see the full weight of government being used to immediately define what has happened, even prior to investigation. The federal government is shutting out the state governments of the from the investigations, setting up the seeming likelihood of federal cover-ups by the FBI, rather than any credible investigation. Many of you know that my own grandparents were in Berlin when Hitler came to power, and they saw the goon squads of the Nazis in that first year, before they were able to flee Berlin and go to Austria, which the Nazis then came to later. They saw the goon squads, and we see them now. ICE has killed before in this past year. As far as I know, the people they killed were not citizens. So in the eyes of many, they didn't count. For the past couple decades, I've noticed that American law is being twisted to mean if you are not a citizen, you don't have full human rights under American law. Human rights that the international community recognizes as rights that belong to all people, but in this country only belong to you if you're citizens. I can give you an example. If you're not a citizen and you're from a country to which you cannot be deported, and you commit a felony, once you've finished the sentence, by American law, you must either be deported or kept in prison for a 6-month administrative period, at the end of which your situation is evaluated, and if you still can't be deported, you're put away again for another 6 months of administrative detention, in which case your case is examined again, and if you can't be deported, you're put away for another 6 months, an indefinite life sentence. That's not human rights. But if you're not a citizen, you don't get human rights. And now, if you are a citizen, it seems you're less likely to even have full civil rights without the right loyalties. Vayakem melech hadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yada et Yosef. A new Pharaoh rose over Egypt, who knew not Joseph. That's what we read in this week's Parsha. In Egypt, Pharaoh is God. What we see in the Torah going on in this story is a clash between 2 proclaimed gods, the God of Israel and the God of Egypt. Pharaoh is seen as God. And with Pharaoh being seen as God, the power of declaring what is right and what is wrong is controlled by Pharaoh's personal whim. Whatever Pharaoh said was law, was law. By contrast, Torah is built on rule of law. Ultimately, there is right and wrong established as basic principle. No one party can simply come and say wrong is right and right is wrong because I say so. Judaism is built on a sense of covenant between the people and God, which means that we as Jews and as human beings have mitzvot, commandments, obligations, but it also means, paradoxically, that God, as the Jewish people conceive of God, is also bound to principles of right and wrong. A God who enters into covenant is binding God's self to commitments as well. covenant, promise. Things are not simply left to the whim of a ruler, all the more so any human being who, regardless of the privilege of his position, is limited to a particular place and time. Right and wrong cannot be based on one person's whimsy and still be right and wrong. Moses, as I said, grows up inside Pharaoh's household. So he knows the ways of the Egyptians from the inside. Yet he needs to know more about who he is. He goes out among the enslaved Hebrews when he grows up. Perhaps as a young man, he goes among the Hebrews, perhaps trying to figure out who he is, being raised on the boundary between Egyptian and Hebrew. When the Torah describes this, it frequently uses the word brother. He goes out to see his brothers, his brethren. And it seems like one interpretation of the way the story is told is he cannot handle the contradictions. He cannot handle those internal contradictions. And you can read in the story how he must flee. And when he does flee and he meets Zipporah, who will become his wife, he meets Zipporah and her sisters. They describe Moses to their father actually as an Egyptian. Ish mitzri hitzilanu miyad haroim. An Egyptian man rescued us from the shepherds and also watered our flocks. To Zipporah and her sisters, Moses looks like an Egyptian. Moses clearly is a man in between the oppressing class and the oppressed class. A Hebrew raised in Pharaoh's household, which is partly what positions him as a good candidate to represent the Hebrews before Pharaoh and to lead the people out of Egypt, because he knows how to be in both worlds. Maybe he knows how to be in an Egyptian world more than he knows how to be in the Hebrew world, but he identifies as a Hebrew. And he hears the call to go back at the burning bush. And he does not want to go. And he argues against going. He presents every argument not to go, but in the end, he has no choice. And at the burning bush, he consciously stops to see what is going on. Asura navera et hamara amare hagadol hazeh. Madua lo yiva hasneh. I will turn and see this great sight. Why is the bush not burning up? Resistance and resilience requires that we stop and notice, that we stay strong and stand firm, and we're persistent. And also that we develop ourselves and become prepared. I remember one point I did a memorial service in front of the family. I learned of the experience of a woman who lived at Bethany Village, whose parents bailed out Rosa Parks. You know the story of Rosa Parks. She was just a little too tired to go to the back of the bus one day in Montgomery, Alabama. And I realized from talking to the family of the people who bailed her out that day, that she was part of a much larger community, and she had been prepared. She was prepared. Through community networks and organizations. She was active in the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. She had attended the Highlander School in Tennessee, a training ground in Tennessee, learned about resistance and resilience. Whether they use that word or not, I don't know. Among others things, at Highlander School in the mountains of Tennessee, she was able to experience a racially integrated setting in the South, which was quite unusual. She had prepared herself, whether she knew it or not. Discussions had already taken place in Montgomery, Alabama, about the potential for a bus boycott in Montgomery, since so much of the business customers of the bus company were African Americans. What would happen if they simply refused to ride the bus? Simply refused to participate in their own removal from society, refused to participate in segregation. But the question was, who was going to be the one who would be arrested? Who was going to be the one that the rest of the community would then rally behind? And when Rosa Parks, later in her life, would talk about that moment, she would just say, I was tired. I was tired. I think she was probably sick and tired. Sick and tired of the situation. In an existential sense, she was sick and tired, and she just decided, it's going to be me. I'm not going to get up. She heard the call and just did it, and went down deeper into Egypt. I think of this type of resistance and resilience. I think also about some of the revolutions of 1989. I think about the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia. Some of you maybe don't remember 1989. That's when the Iron Curtain fell. And when Czech authorities attempted to suppress citizen protesters on the streets, news went out that someone had been killed by the government. I don't know if it was true or not, but that's the word that went out. And the people were even more infuriated. And the central square in Prague was filled with people. And there had been all sorts of other pressures on the government at that point, and the government fell. The government had been censoring papers and media. They had just built a huge tower to jam television signals from the West. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Prague. I've been to Prague. Prague in many ways has many old, beautiful buildings. It also has this huge television tower, towering over everything, higher than anything around. Do you remember that television tower? Concrete television tower. That's the tower that was built to jam signals. It was also built on top of part of the medieval Jewish cemetery. Which made me think when I was there that it was as if the entire city was standing next to a huge tombstone. When the communist government fell, that tower actually came to be used as a television broadcasting tower rather than a jamming tower. And the first post-communist president of Czechoslovakia, and then later the Czech Republic, was a playwright, Václav Havel. The communist government, had oppressed him and imprisoned him, yet he eventually became that country's first post-communist president, in part because of how he used the theater to put forth his message. The theater, another form of resistance and resilience. The story we are starting to read this week in the Torah is about the struggle with illegitimate authority and the struggle with legitimate authority used illegitimately. It is a call for courage and persistence, for resistance and resilience. We've seen it before, and we are in it again. We must be firm and persistent. Chazak v'amatz. Be strong and of good courage. Shabbat Shalom.